Well, the final thing I want to talk about was a series of articles written by what I'm going to call a conservative journalist called Katie Glass. I think that Katie's probably a pretty decent person.
Is this a conservative or a conservative?
A London conservative.
Sorry,
so
conservative.
Yeah. But she's clearly part of the London sort of Westminster bubble. She writes for places like the Times, the Telegraph, the Evening Standard, the Sun, Spectator, Elle magazine, Vanity Fair, things like this, right? So to my knowledge, she's not a wokeist, and so this is one of the reasons why I thought this was worth doing a piece on, because she's trying to embrace essentially what we've been saying, which is get out of the cities. They're not wholesome, they're unhealthy, they're bad for you. And it's really interesting how since last October till now, she's been publicly documenting this in like the Telegraph. And the way that this has been demonstrated is in many ways kind of parallel to my own life. And I luckily got out of this kind of mentality a few years ago, and I kind of fell into a more sort of traditional family life, whereas she's about the same age as me, and that's put her in a less enviable position, which I think is a bit tragic in some ways. And it's not her fault, I would say, because one of the things that you've got to remember is that people of around sort of 40, our age, when they were younger, they were given a whole slew of messages that were just false. They were told a bunch of things about reality that were not true, and they were kind of tricked, and they've had something taken away from them. And I'm lucky to have been able to sort of jump on that train just before it left the station. But there's a part of me that feels that maybe for Katie, that's not an option now. And I am genuinely sympathetic to what's happened. Again, I don't think she's a bad person. This isn't going to be like dunking on her or anything like this. But we are going to have to talk about some hard truths. And these hard truths are important for young people now. So if you are like in your 20s now, you're going to want to think about these things that Katie was encouraged by culture and wider society to not think about. Anyway, so as she says on her website, she's a conservative. Well, she doesn't say conservative, but by the standards of today, she's a conservative journalist. And she, on the 31st of October, posted this to her Twitter feed. Exciting news, Midlife Crisis fans. Having ripped up my whole life during the last lockdown, breaking up with my fiancé, selling my London flat, and deciding to move to the middle of nowhere, the Telegraph have given me a column to write about it all starting Sunday. Moving out of London, of course, being a good thing. You don't have to be a very smart person to be able to understand that London's actually not a very great place, but you do have to be prepared to become a non-Londoner for this to work. You can't just take London's grime and then go somewhere nice and expect it to be like London. So she published an article called Why I'm Ripping Up My Life and Starting Over, and this is a description of how her life in London fell apart. And this was on the 1st of November that she published this, and it's about the lockdowns, really. The lockdowns did this. The lockdowns ruined her life and relationship. We, of course, have been stridently opposed to lockdowns since the very concept was raised, and we thought the lockdown should have been lifted at day 1, then day 2, and right the way until the point where they have been partially lifted. And still, any amount of lockdown is outright tyranny that's totally unjustified by any moral standard that we have traditionally in this country anyway.
So she mentioned she was planning to get married.
Yeah.
She was planning to have children with this guy, and then they broke up. Why did that happen?
So, right, during the lockdown, well, before the lockdown, she, with her fiancé of 5 years, they've been together, been engaged for 2 years, and they've been attempting to get pregnant for over a year. Thing is, she's 39, I think, when she wrote this. And this goes back to the piece we did the other day where they were saying, oh, don't worry, your fertile life is now 37. It's like, yeah, but, even though technically you might still have the potential to have children in your late 30s to early 40s, the likelihood, it does fall off a cliff, and Katie found this firsthand. She failed to get pregnant. And then during the lockdown, basically, she started going a bit stir crazy. And she says, at first it was fun playing at being a housewife, but like all games, I got lonely playing alone. I began to worry I was carving out a role for myself that I didn't really want. Meanwhile, as a radio, TV, and production ground to a halt, my work projects started getting canned. I was panicked I was losing myself to housework. Was this how the next 20 years of my life was going to look? And so it's like, well, if you were going to have kids, yeah, that is pretty much how your life ends up looking. But you're not alone. You're constantly worried about what your kids are doing, what they're getting into, what they're destroying, blah, 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 right? The lockdown, as I said, it destroyed her relationship with her fiancé, and that's fair enough. I'm sure this can happen to anyone and has happened to many people. The lockdowns were hard on everyone, and I think that they're going to age poorly. But she says, at the height of summer lockdown, I lay on the wooden floor of the sitting room drinking red wine and eating orange calipos, watching my iPhone light up and ignoring it. Sometimes I flick through Instagram pictures my friends have posted of their chubby babies and bearded husbands. At 39, I was single again. It's a pretty sad way of putting it. You know, ladies, don't wait until you're nearly 40 to start a family. It just doesn't work, right? Use your fertile years to get it done. Don't use your fertile years in the way that myself and Katie were both encouraged to do, which was to be single and go and party and have no particular commitments and have no structure or thought for the future. You know, all of these things. And you still see it, like the article we covered the other day. You can put it off until you're older. You can put it off until you're older. Maybe some people can, but should you put it off until you're older? And the answer is actually no, right? From a common sense perspective of the average person, you know, you're probably not going to be that fringe case who happens at 40 years old to fall into the handsome husband and the healthy, you know, brood of kids in a nice cottage in the country that you wanted. If you want that, plan for it now. You know, work on it now. You have to have a life plan, right? And so she says, I reverted to how I lived when I was single, writing all night, dancing around to music, and sometimes I'd chat on the phone with friends. The ones in the country sounded happiest, sitting in their gardens and swimming in the sea. I remembered how I'd once had a dream of living in the country and writing a book. Maybe it's time to try a new life. Maybe it'll be a farmhouse in Wales where I'll get my own flock of alpacas or micro pigs. Maybe I'll be a novelist who makes jam, or maybe I'll move to a lighthouse and stage immersive theatre productions and meet a hot farmer. If this is the end of the world, I may as well try something. Not to sound cruel, but this should have been something you did in your 20s. Now that you're approaching 40, I fear that the time may have passed. Again, I don't want to keep hammering this, but as a warning to young people listening, don't wait. You know, don't think, I'll just go spend my evenings as a singleton getting drunk in London, you know, doing drugs, partying, and like working at the BBC or wherever, the Telegraph, wherever. If you want something more solid than that, don't spend a decade or two in London. Anyway, she then by November... Sorry, I didn't give you this link, I guess, John. There's a link in there if you want to grab it up. But she posted another article on November the 7th, basically saying that she has no idea what she's doing and she thinks she's having a midlife crisis. She says, in London, I was excited to live surrounded by screaming bars and hipster cafes and drug dealers with yoga classes, police sirens and raves on my doorstep. She sounds like a university student.
That's awful. Like,
yeah,
that's not what's desirable about London.
Exactly. That. I mean, it is for a few years while you're in university.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, and if you're, you know, some, you know, stock exchange broker maybe for a few years, that's fun and exciting. But, you know, when you're in your mid to late 30s, you should have moved beyond this. Soho is only half an hour away on the bus. In the country, I'm drawn to the opposite. My cravings are for endless green views, wide empty fields, and lazy sheep. I register with estate agents feeling like a grown-up, but I also like I'm playing at being a grown-up, like Tom Hanks in Big. They take my name down as Mrs. Glass. I correct them and say Miss Glass. They send me properties and tell me the local schools are good. I say I don't care about that. How many bedrooms do you want? An estate agent asks. She says, I don't mind. They say, don't be ridiculous. How many children do you have? She hasn't become an adult. She's been trapped in a sort of extended state of adolescence by living in this, like, I mean, honestly, it sounds a lot like the Pleasure Island from Pinocchio. You know, come and drink, come and smoke, come and gamble. This will be great. And then before you know it, you've turned into a jackass. You know, whereas the responsible people didn't go to Pleasure Island and got on with their lives. And this is a lesson that Miss Glass didn't learn, and I didn't learn when I was younger. And it was kind of luck that I kind of fell out of it. But she says, I realize I'm struggling to find a house because what I'm really seeking is a new life, and I don't really know what that looks like yet. And so she's nearly 40, and it seems her life effectively consists of nothing at all. She's got no dependents. No one will be like, no one relies on her for anything. And she's totally independent and autonomous and atomized, living in London, living a hedonistic lifestyle, drinking lots of wine, going to parties. And it's like, okay, that would have been fun when you were 25, but now you're 35. What do you have to show for it? And the answer is nothing. And like I said, this is not me getting at her or anything like this. I feel bad for her. I feel bad that she was told by all of the people around her that this was an acceptable way of living, and not just the people around the culture, the way that pop culture has gone, that this is an acceptable way to live and there will be no consequences. But the thing is, there are always consequences. There is always a bill for everything. Everything will be paid in full. And this is Katie finding this out. So in December, she moved to the countryside. And like I said, she's not a private individual or anything. This is all public articles she's written about, so I'm not prying or anything like this. This is all stuff she's volunteered for the public. And I thought it was very worth talking about. Katie moved into a rose-coloured farmhouse with her friend. Now, her friend is married with kids, and she's previously lived with this friend while they lived in her friend lived in London and moved out of London with her husband 7 years ago. Something like that, where 5 years ago, something like that. So they've got a young boy who was a toddler when she shared a house with her in London, and now he's 7, and so he's running around in the back garden playing bows and arrows. And she says, yet somehow in the time that has elapsed, I've still not grown up. I'm back to being single, sleeping in his playroom on a broken sofa bed. That's right. No one relies on you for anything. You didn't mature and become an adult. I always had a fancy that if I left my fiancée in London, I'd move to a high-rise apartment in New York, write for the Village Voice, go drinking in Williamsburg, and explore the Upper East Side on weekends. I did not picture myself in a tiny village in Cornwall being woken up by a child dancing to YMCA at 7 a.m. Sounds like you kind of had unrealistic expectations. But I tell you what, one of my favourite things is in the morning when my son comes in and wakes me up. It's always fun, because he's like, Daddy, I'm here to see you. I'm thrilled to see you, and I'm tired as anything, but he wants to play, and it's not bad at all. It's incredibly wholesome, and I would never give it up for anything. He says that Tanya and Andrew, the couple she lives with, are like The Good Life. Did you ever watch The Good Life?
No.
Oh, it's adorable. It's about a couple who basically try and live off the grid in the 60s and 70s, something like that, and have their own garden in the back garden and stuff like this. But Andrew is apparently a Tory voting stand-up comedian who spends his days looking after chicken and baking bread, while Tanya, his wife, furiously tweets about feminism. They have the kind of imperfectly perfect relationship that Richard Curtis rom-coms are made of. Because COVID times and they don't drink, I can't even get drunk, go down to the pub and snog someone. Instead, I sneak bottles of wine to the boys' treehouse, go on Hinge and call my bridesman. It's an adventure, says Martin. Come back to London, says Rob. What's left back in London for you? You shouldn't be thinking, how can I go and get drunk? You should be thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? When I lived alone, meals involved wandering to the fridge at midnight. Here we eat dinner at 5 p.m. I've not seen so many shepherd's pies since I was 6. We eat freshly baked challah, rice puddings and Sunday roasts. I put on a stone and I got depressed. Even with Tanya's hugs and bridesmen constantly calling, I feel painfully alone. I worry that in the rhythm of family life, country life, there is no place for a single woman. There probably is if you're in your 20s. The question is, when you're 40, what are you offering a prospective husband? What are you offering a prospective husband that he can't get from a woman 10 years younger than you? And again, I don't mean to rub this in. I'm not trying to be harsh. But this is the reality of the situation. And it's not very pretty, And so for the wider culture to have 20 years ago told her, don't worry about it, you'll be fine, go and enjoy yourself, it's not very responsible. And she's reaping that reward now. And so she needs to ask herself, who did this to me? Who told me these things? Why did I think that I was just going to live forever in this, like, pleasure island paradise in London, constantly going to raves and getting off my face on coke and all this. Why did you think that was going to last forever? You know? She says, one day I wake up from a nightmare in which I'm being eaten alive by a pig and decide it's time to act. I need to establish a new life for myself here. I need purpose, I need friends, and to go on a date. Well, best of luck. So by February 20th, 2021, Katie has a new article she publishes. She's moved to a new house in a different village and is surrounded by ex-Londoners. She keeps looking for new homes because she can't settle. And she says, that night scanning Rightmove, I see the farmhouse I was buying come back on the market for an extra 50 grand. I want to scream. Suddenly it feels like it's all too much. All those months of pointless building castles in the sky, wasting energy, dreaming up something that now seems like it was no more than a distraction. They say you cannot run away from yourself. I tried. I thought I was brave coming all this way to start a new life, but perhaps the braver thing would have been to stay put. In my rented fisherman's cottage, I play landslide on repeat, hoping the neighbours can't hear it. It's very sad, isn't it? She seems lost and alone. No one in the world depends on her for anything. If she were to die tomorrow, it would just be friends in remote other places who would say, "Oh God, that's terrible. Katie's died." I'm looking at an atomized person, and I just feel terribly sorry for them. Anyway, by April 3rd, she's moved to a new house, apparently in another different tiny Cornish village. And she says, it's the real Cornwall that interests me. So she's starting to understand that she has to change her perspective. She has to change her outlook. So I head inland, under the arches of spindly trees stripped by winter, past terraces of bungalows waving Cornish flags and multicolour houses on steep hills, fields of cabbages, daffodils and caravan graveyards. From the windows, I can see nothing but rolling countryside of lush fields and soft pasture land. Here I could hide from tourists in the summer and hang out with farmers. I wonder if the cider's good. Thing is, this is the wrong attitude. Like, who are the farmers? Why would the farmers want to hang out with you? Like, you're just assuming, you're ascribing, the farmers. Well, name one. You don't know them. They don't know you. Why would they want to? You're looking at them as if they're characters in your novel, when they're not. They're people who have their own lives, own ambitions, own interests, own dependents, their own responsibilities. You don't have any of these things. They're busy. You're trying to make them something of yours. I see a cottage near Grampound, a village halfway between St Austell and Truro. Just for anyone who's wondering, I went to college at St Austell. I know exactly what this area of the country is like. I lived there 3 years in Newquay, and it was an hour bus journey every day to get to St Austell College, even though it was only 14 miles away, because the roads are terrible and it's, constant winding country lanes and stuff like this. But it's lovely area of the country, don't get me wrong. But it seems like a place where people really live, although in lockdown it's hard to tell. I tour around with an estate agent in his 20s who went to London to do his degree and then came back drawn to be among his friends. Now he runs the local brass band. As we walk around the village, he says hello to everyone we meet in the street. I went to school with her. He's my dad's best mate, he informs me, grinning. I can't think of anywhere in the world I'd rather live. And she says, I want that feeling for me. Of course you do. It's a feeling of belonging. It's a feeling of inclusion. It's a feeling of authenticity. You'll notice that this guy, he's still in his 20s. He went to London. He got his degree. He got his experience. Then he came back. He didn't spend a decade and a half in London living it up, as an extended adolescent. Again, it's not a judgment about Katie herself. All of the cultural signals would have been telling her that was all just fine. But those cultural signals are wrong, and the people who have been giving you these signals have robbed you of something, and that's the thing that they've robbed you of. That feeling of being embedded in a community, part of something. Anyway, because she doesn't know what it's like to be embedded in a community, because she's used to being essentially an anonymous person in a giant cosmopolitan city, she doesn't know how to handle village life. She published this on the 10th of April. I'm surprised by how suffocating village life is. The novelty has worn off. Now back in the cottage, I find myself not charmed but irritated by people staring into my windows when I'm writing or sitting half dressed. I'm frustrated by messages pinging in from people who said they noticed my lights are on, so I must be in, or they've spotted me that day in the shop. Someone I've never met messages me to say he saw me out driving my car, and although it's friendly, I'm surprised by how suffocating it feels. And so what she's experiencing now is what these sort of close-knit rural communities are like. People make demands on individuals and each other that atomized Londoners don't. And these demands are a necessary part of being in the community, but they also provide boons that you were looking for. You know, how do I feel like I'm a part of the scenery, like I know everyone else? And well, that's what they're actually trying to do. They're trying to help you incorporate into this community. And so it might feel suffocating for an atomized Londoner who's accustomed to no one giving a damn whether you live or die, but this is how these people bring you in. And honestly, you've got to kind of get used to it, because that's your life now. That's what you are. You are not some dreamy Londoner who's going to one day move to Manhattan and become famous. That's not. Your life is over on that regard. But you can have a different life now that you were looking for, in one in which you invest yourself in the people around you, in your local community. That's what you've got to do. You have to change. You have to change. One day, I'm standing in a shop doorway taking photographs when a woman walking past loudly tuts, "You're not trying to hide it much." "Not trying to hide what?" I ask, confused. "That you're not from here," she says. "I live here," I smile cheerily. "Where?" she demands, wanting to know my full address and when I moved in. "You're not from there, Katie. You're not from there. And you need to respect the people who are from there, and show them some deference, right? Show them that you are actually here to do your part as a member of the community that you invaded. You came to their community. They didn't come to your community. You went to them seeking something they have."
You're in, not of.
Exactly. You are in, not of. Show some goddamn respect. That's what you need to do. You need to allow them to get used to you, and that means essentially giving something of yourself. A friend who moved to London from a village in Hampshire says this is what all villagers are like, telling me stories of how her neighbours commented on her boyfriends when she gained or lost weight, things like that. Other friends who moved to Gloucestershire describe one local woman confronting her saying, "We all know you're that rich Londoner." All of these villages are like this, and you need to know your place, because your place is not at the top of the hierarchy here, right? You are very much you're coming in at the bottom, and you have to accept this, because frankly, you owe them. Right? You owe them. You sought to take advantage of the thing they created, the little village that you also want to call home, and now you have to act like you have this responsibility to them, because you do. And they are right to patrol you, to gatekeep and say, well, look, you need to fit in around here because you do. Reputations move fast, another friend warns me, but I'm too late. I hear from a neighbour that I have broken the Mousehole Code. It's a village called Mousehole, apparently. Tiny village, I've never heard of it. Which is something that I'd written in this column, in a column of hers, and to which a villager had taken umbrage. Another villager calls to tell me off. Okay, why weren't you following the Mousehole Code? What do you think is more important in your life at this point than following that Mousehole Code, Katie? Right? Whatever it is, and whoever you offended, you get off your computer now, and I know you're probably going to be listening to this or something like that and go like, oh, how could these evil, how could they say this? No, get off your phone and go and apologise to that person you offended, because there was a code that you broke, and you didn't know about this code because you were the arrogant foreigner who had invaded their domain and then started acting like it was your own. The code is sacred, but you're not. If you leave, they're not going to miss you unless you start pulling your weight in the way that this village operates. I don't know what the Mousehole Code is. I have no idea. But I would go and ask someone and be like, oh, God, what did I do to offend them? They'd be like, well, around here we've got this thing where you don't do this because of these reasons, and it's just the done thing around here. So, okay, well, I'll do that then. And you should do the same. This week, for a week, I panic as the granite walls of the slim cottage close in, and I become overwhelmed by a feeling that I've already lost the new start I'm here to gain. I find myself longing for Penberth's deserted cliffs or even London, where it's easy to be anonymous. Why would you move to a tiny village and seek to be anonymous? You want everything on your own terms, and you expect the world to conform to you, but it won't. And it doesn't have to. You, in fact, have to conform to the world around you. And the way to do that is to accept that these people have a moral claim on what you do. That's what being a part of a community is. She says, I remember first moving to the capital and being overwhelmed by the possibility of reinventing myself. How I loved walking for hours through the city without seeing anyone I knew, discovering new versions of myself. Sometimes I'd dress chicly and go out on dates with men too old for me at the bar at Dorchester Hotel. Then the next night, pull on scruffy dungarees and play at being a hipster in a gallery in East London. Sounds like you wasted your youth, indulging in, the vain pleasures of the flesh, but not planning for the future. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I did too, right? But that's how I ended up learning this lesson, and how I ended up knowing where you're going wrong. She says, so now in Mousehole, I feel asphyxiated by the claustrophobia of village life. Other people having decided who I am while I'm still trying to find out. So I do what I do every time I panic, I start packing again. Well, I guess you can go back to London, can't you? Where else have you got? Or you could try to stop feeling like you're some atomized, independent, free, single Londoner and become a local person of the village, someone who builds close relationships. Try volunteering. Try doing some community organizing. Maybe someone needs some help. Try going and showing the local community that you're actually there for them. You're not just there for yourself. You're actually there to help people. You want to be a part of their lives. And if that's not the case, what are you doing there? If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 p.m. UK time on lotuseaters.com.